This is Joe DeFranco. I'd like to welcome everyone to the presentation. I'll be reviewing crane rigging and signaling safety and updates to the requirements, how violations to these standards have been cited by OSHA, some examples there. We all know that the goal of safety programs and training is to ensure the safety of employees. It's the employer's responsibility to provide a safe place of employment for their employees. OSHA is also in place to assist with this goal, so we'll see they can issue citations if there are violations. So want to keep everybody safe, want to stay in compliance, that's the goal, and we want to help assist with that and go over some information here today. At Construction Safety Experts, we provide safety, compliance, and training services. You can see some of the things that we do: certified crane operator training with practical and written testing. We do a course at least every month for that. Annual overhead, mobile, and tower crane inspections and load testing services. Rigger and signal person training, so we're going to look at a lot of that here today and some updates and ways we can be in compliance. Forklift, aerial lift operator training, accident investigation, program and job site evaluations, program development and written manuals, safety HAZCOM manuals, OSHA and MSHA customized training programs. We also provide job site safety professionals for shorter long-term assignments, expert witness services, we do quite a bit of that, and citation reviews. So I'll show some examples here today, but we get calls almost on a weekly basis. You know, companies had received citations, so can we assist with some training or taking a look at those citations? I did want to mention that OSHA sets the minimum standards. We can see there's state plans, there's a federal OSHA, and then some states have said they want to have their own state plan. We can see the list here. Those state plans have to be at least as stringent as the federal programs. And we'll also want to keep in mind that not only does OSHA set the minimum requirements, but your company policies and procedures, your customers that you work for, they may have some more stringent requirements. So we want to comply with the most stringent requirements that we're looking at, and what are the best practices, what are the operators' manuals, what do the manufacturers specify, and things that we're going to learn from previous citations, accidents, some of the things we're going to review here today. When we look at some definitions of the new standard, the Mobile Crane Standard 1926-1400, 1401 has some definitions. And this standard was issued, we'll see, in November of 2010. The old standard was 1926-550. Now we have the new standard. It's been in place for a few years now. The competent person is capable of identifying existing and predictable hazards, also has authority to take prompt corrective measures to eliminate them. So should be able to recognize hazards and then the authority to shut the crane down, for example, if there is a hazard or deficiency, and remedy that problem. Then we have a qualified person. That's a person who has a degree, a certificate, professional standing, training, knowledge, experience to resolve problems related to the subject matter. So we'll see riggers and signal persons typically qualified, and the requirements and how we can meet those requirements coming up. When we look at the crane standard, some of the requirements that were in place: crane operators, that's cranes over 1 ton, 2,000 pounds maximum capacity, required to be certified by a nationally accredited organization. There's a few of them out there that do it. The NCCCO is the one that's been around the longest. We have the CIC, NCCER, state licensing, military licensing, also employer programs which are audited as an option. So a few ways to go about crane operator certification, and that requirement had to be met 4 years from the issuance of the new standard to be in compliance. That was for crane operators. The standard came out in November of 2010. Employers were given a phase-in period of 4 years, so by November of this year all operators were to be certified, and there are some exceptions to the requirement there for the 1 ton maximum capacity or more, and that's found in the scope of the standard. And we're going to see coming up that that phase-in period has actually been extended, but I just wanted to go over that information here. All other requirements in the standard had to be met by the issuance of November 2010, so if we're talking about rigger, signal person, fall protection issues, power line changes to the standard, everything in the standard was current when it was issued and had to be in compliance. The phase-in period was for operator certification. We can see that there was a proposed rule that was issued in February of this year on this slide, and that extended the compliance date for operator certification to November of 2017. But again, most companies, most of your customers, most crane rental companies currently have this requirement in effect, so doesn't look like it's going anywhere, but there is maybe appears to be an extension till 2017 for operator certification. Some reasons the compliance date was extended: there were questions about how operators are being certified for different categories of cranes based on type and capacity. Also, changes to other areas that needed to be addressed. On this slide, we can see a temporary enforcement policy for use of proximity alarms and insulating links. The current language states these devices have to be listed, labeled, or accepted by a nationally recognized testing laboratory. But to date, there are no proximity alarm insulating link devices that meet the NRTL requirements. So we can see that on the next slide here, OSHA has issued this temporary policy for proximity alarms and insulating links. The temporary policy states, you can see for proximity alarms, if we look at that second paragraph here on the side, it says, because no current proximity alarm meets the requirement, an employer may use a crane in construction with a proximity alarm in conjunction with another appropriate measure. If they use a dedicated spotter, range control warning device, for example, if these conditions are met, the employer will not be considered in violation. Insulating links, devices, same language. It says an employer. If we look on that paragraph here, it states that an employer may use a crane in construction with an insulating link in conjunction with another appropriate measure, such as a dedicated spotter or range control warning device. If these conditions are met, the employer will not be considered in violation. So I want to have the proper training for working around power lines, using proximity alarms, encroachment prevention measures, insulating links devices, and want to make sure we're in compliance with everything here. Standard also has to address some issues for non-conductive taglines. The wording in the standard talks about non-conductive taglines, but even a tagline that is the least conductive, if it's wet or contaminated or dirty, can be a conductor, so they're probably going to address that issue as well. On the next slide, I also wanted to review the new ASME P30.1 standard. This came out in March of this year, so relatively new, but it addresses planning for load handling activities, so some good reference information for riggers, signal persons, lift planning, and we can see on the next slide here we have the table of contents, some of the key areas. We have the scope and definitions, we have load handling activity, personnel responsibilities, qualifications, roles and responsibilities, and then we have standard lift plans and critical lift plans. So we're seeing more customers that want to bring in a third party to do a lift plan evaluation. Once the crane is set up, we typically scope the crane out to where we're going to make that lift, verify the radius, boom length, boom angle, what is the gross load weight, what is the crane rated for at that particular setup, and verify the riggers, signal persons, the barricades, everything is in good condition, and we're seeing that requirement more and more. So some good information in this standard for sample lift plans you can see in the appendix there, and some industry references. This is also P30.1 on this particular slide, some load handling activity considerations. We can see the key items. Item A, potential hazards to persons, always important for us. Item B, hazards in proximity to the work area. Item C, complexity of the load. What is the center of gravity? What is the weight? Always things we want to consider and evaluate before any lift. Item D, adverse impact from environmental conditions, effect of wind, for example. Some of our newer cranes have wind meters, anemometers, gives the operator a wind readout in the cab. Many cranes don't have that, so a good idea to have a pocket wind meter, a way to verify the wind speed, verify we're in compliance with manufacturer's recommendations and what the standards specify for wind speeds. Also talks about support of the load under item D. So where are we setting that load? Can the floor structure sustain the pounds per square foot that we're going to exert? Always a good idea to verify that. Item E talks about rigging capacity and performance. So how do we inspect the rigging? When do we take it out of service? Those type of requirements. And then item F, adverse commercial impact. We're seeing more companies that use this as a criteria for determining a critical lift. If the load has significant replacement time, or if the cost of replacing the load is considered significant, they'll say this is a critical lift, and we're doing more third-party evaluations based on that criteria. On the following slide, also in P30.1, load handling activities, so you can see the review considerations, items A through H that we just mentioned. And then we want to categorize the load handling activity. Is it a standard lift? Then there's a recommendation for a verbal plan and basic written document. If it's a critical lift, basic written document, detailed work package. Okay, so we verify everything. Always the best approach for every lift, but critical lift, there could be more planning and documentation and verification there. And this is also P30.1. It's a lift data sheet. It's a sample lift plan. So typically, if we're doing a critical lift, these are the parameters we would look at: the crane details, okay, the manufacturer, the load details, the weight, the rigging, what type of rigging size, capacity, additional weight, what do our deductions weigh, what is the weight of the block, the ball, the lifting beam, for example, what are the capacities, okay, at that particular setup, documentations, documents attached, the crane layout, any blueprints, drawing, any things that might be pertinent for us, and then notes and some signatures that we reviewed all of these key items. So it's a new standard, P30.1, good reference. If you'd like some more information, feel free to give me a call on that. I'd like to get into some signal person qualification information here. Required as of November 2010, so the new standard made it real clear for everybody. It was actually required well before that, found in many other parts of the OSHA and ASME standards. A designated signal person knows and understands the types of signals used, competent in the application of the type of signals used, and basic understanding of equipment operation and limitations, including crane dynamics. So what happens when we swing, when we stop loads, there's inertia and forces and different things that have to be considered there. Boom deflection is their stored energy that we have to be aware of as riggers and signal persons that we'd want some effective training on. Knows and understands the requirements of the standard and demonstrates they meet the requirements through a verbal or written test and a practical test. So verbal or written, we always recommend a written test. The old OSHA expression is if it's not documented, it never happens. So we're taking time to do these inspections and training, and always a good idea to have a written test. We verify understanding, okay, that the instructor presented the information, the candidates understood everything, and that's documented with a written test is always our recommendation. And then a practical, we verify the candidates know the signals and can demonstrate that, give the operator some signals and follow those functions. The operator, signal person, and lift supervisor are able to effectively communicate in the language used, so always want to verify that. Can we understand each other, especially if we're using radio signal communication there. Some more information on signals on this slide. A signal person shall be provided in each of the following situations. So when do we need a signal person? The point of operation, meaning the load travel or the area near at load placement, is not in full view of the operator. If the equipment is traveling, the direction of travel is obstructed, or due to site-specific safety concerns, the operator or person handling the load determines that it is necessary. Most customers require a qualified signal person for every lift, so we have to plan this prior to arriving on site, who is providing the signal person, verify their qualification. When we do the crane operator training, and we also do rigger and signal person training, but we tell the crane operator one of their first tasks is to identify your rigger, your signal person. They need to produce a training certification record that has a current date, that it's not expired, and then verify everything's in compliance there. Also, not only that, but do a dry run, get them in an open area, have them give the proper signals, make sure they have the right experience for that particular task is also a recommendation. On the same slide it says signals shall be hand, voice, audible, or new signals. Primarily hand and radio signal communication is what we cover. Hand signals in accordance with Appendix A of the Crane standard. That's an important statement for us. That makes it uniform from job site to job site throughout the nation. Anywhere we go, we'll have the standard hand signal, so it's going to eliminate a lot of confusion, and everything is going to be uniform wherever we have crane and rigging signaling functions going on. Hand signal charts must also be posted on the equipment or conspicuously posted in the vicinity of hoisting operations, so make sure warning decals, labels, hand signal charts posted on the crane, for example, they're legible, they're not worn down, greased over, faded, missing altogether, but we want to have those warning decals and other charts visible for us and legible. These are standard hand signals in the standard. Make sure the signal persons are trained on the hand signals. Also, power lines setup, load dynamics, the other items that we talked about previously. So not just having someone label the hand signals and then all of a sudden they're a signal person, but we feel comprehensive training. They have to know about power line clearances, hazards, crane setup. If something happens with that particular machine, it's usually the ground personnel, the rigger, the signal person that have a lot of the exposure. So want to take the time and have the proper training. Some of our standard signals you can see here, the stop signal, for example. We do a lot of signal person training, and the candidates tell us, well, we use a closed fist for a stop signal, and that's pretty common, but we want everyone to get used to the standard stop signal, which is, we can see here, with arm extended horizontally to the side, palm down, arms swung back and forth. So again, anywhere we go, we're using the same signals. They want to say, well, everyone on the site understands that a closed fist is a stop signal, but again, the standard says the standard hand signal shall be used. So if it covers that functions, that's really what OSHA mandates, and we want everyone to use the standard signal. On the same page, we can see raise the boom and lower the load, the third one down here on the left. So basically two functions there. We're booming up, cabling down at the same time. So booming up, we're getting stronger. Cabling down, holding our load. So this is a skill, just like operating the crane is a skill. We want to make sure we have the proper training, give people the right experience, the right time to practice, get familiar with these hand signals, and make sure we use the right hand signal at the appropriate time. On the following page, continuation of our standard hand signals. We can see in the center, top center here, move slowly. It said a hand is placed in front of the hand that is giving the action signal. That indicates do that function slowly. Again, a lot of candidates say, well, we rub our hands together. That tells us to do that function slowly. But again, want to use the standard signal unless something is not covered by a standard signal. In that case, if the operator, signal person, supervisor agree on a non-standard signal, then something different can be used. But if we have a signal that covers the function, we need to go ahead and use that. All of the citations I'm going to go over today have been issued after 2010, the new crane standards. So just to give us an idea of what OSHA looks for on the projects and how they cite some of these standards. This particular one is a serious violation. And you can see here when using non-standard hand signals, the signal person, operator, and lift director did not contact each other prior to the operation and agree on a non-standard hand signal. It says A, at the job site, the crane operator and signal person did not meet and agree on the non-standard signals being used prior to lift operations, and a $2,100 citation amount issued there. This one, really they were probably better off issuing this one as giving a hand signal. The person was giving improper hand signals on the project, so the citation probably should have been the signal person was not qualified and the operator did not stop operations when the hazard was discovered. And again, that's something that should have been done prior to lifting operations. So this one probably wasn't worded properly because we shouldn't be giving non-standard hand signals if those functions are covered by standard signals. So we did address some of those issues with OSHA in the informal conference on this one, but just to give you an idea that they do look for the proper hand signals on job sites when there's crane operations. When we talk about type of violations, we saw the previous one was a serious violation. There's different levels of citations. Other than serious, we can see here, typically something maybe with the written program, but maybe would not cause death or serious physical harm. A lot of times there's no dollar amount issued if it's other than serious. It can be up to $7,000, however. A serious violation means there's probability that death or serious physical harm could result. Crane, heavy equipment, rigging, signal violations, they're always going to be at least serious violations. And the fines can start out at $7,000, and then we can see credits given for the type of safety program you have, your company history, those type of things. That's why when we look at these citations in this presentation, everyone is not $7,000. They may be serious violations, but some credits and some adjustments may have been made for the final amount. A willful violation is a violation that the employer intentionally or knowingly commits. They knew there was a hazard and with plain indifference proceeded, and that can be up to $70,000 for a willful violation. So if we knew we needed training and decided not to do it and proceeded with the task, there was an accident or injury, that could be classified as a willful violation for us. A repeat violation is a violation that is the same or similar to a previous violation with the same employer. And again, penalties up to $70,000 for that. Some information on our rigging requirements. It says rigger qualification. Qualified rigger required for assembly, disassembly work. So when do we need a qualified rigger? If we're assembling a lattice boom crane, for example, we would have to have a qualified rigger. When employees are engaged in hooking, unhooking, or guiding the load, or initial connection of a load to a component or structure, and are within the fall zone, the materials must be rigged by a qualified rigger. So anytime we're attaching, detaching, manipulating loads, guiding loads, qualified rigger requirement we can see there. 1926 251 rigging standard inspections. It says each day before being used, the sling and all fastenings and attachments inspected for damage or defects by a competent person. So this is part of any rigger training. How do we inspect synthetic slings, chain, wire rope, for example? Do we have a wire rope sling? The criteria there is going to be different for broken wires, for example, in a rope lay or a strand. The criteria is different for a wire rope sling versus the wire rope on a mobile crane. Is it a running? Is it a standing? Is it a rotation resistant rope on a mobile crane? How many broken wires are we allowed? So during the training, you know, we have to ensure that the tags are legible. We know what we're good for in the basic hitches, vertical basket choker hitch, the overall condition of the sling, the rigging. If we notice any damage or any deficiencies, we want to get that item out of service. Another sample of a citation here. The crane operator did not ensure that a qualified rigger was rigging a roof truss in this particular case, and you can see zero amount for the penalty issued, but this was grouped with other citations, and this was citation 1, item 3. There were other violations, so they grouped those together, but again did look for the requirement for a qualified rigger on this one. On this next violation, this one says whenever there is a concern as to safety, the operator must have the authority to stop and refuse to handle loads until a qualified person has determined the safety has been assured. It said the operator of the crane did not stop the job while taking non-standard signals. The operator of the crane did not stop while having an unqualified rigger rigging the roof trusses. And the operator of the crane did not stop when he was unable to reach the general contractor due to high winds. So they were setting trusses on a new home in this instance, and there was a collapse, and there were some injuries that resulted. And you can see some of the key things we're talking about. Again, standard hand signals, qualified riggers, verifying wind speeds, resulted in a $2,100 citation here, and again, injuries that should have been avoided. Keeping clear of the load on the next slide, where available, hoisting routes that minimize the exposure of employees to hoisted loads must be used. So we don't want people under suspended loads. The standard states no employee must be within the fall zone. The fall zone is anywhere under the crane hook that the load can fall directly below it or reasonably be anticipated to fall near or under the crane hook. So if we have a basket hitch, for example, could the load slide out of the basket hitch? Are there wind speeds? What is the surface area of that particular load? Can the wind catch that and push it to the side if it should fall? So that's what we define as the fall zone. So no employees must be within the fall zone except employees engaged in hooking, again, unhooking or guiding a load, the initial attachment of a load to a component or structure, or operating a concrete hopper or concrete bucket. So want people not to be under suspended loads is the general approach here. Looking at work area control to prevent employees from entering hazardous areas, the employer shall instruct employees assigned to work on or near equipment as authorized personnel how to recognize struck by and pinch crush hazard areas posed by the rotating superstructure. So what's in the back of the crane, typically the counterweight, or are there items that stick out further from the counterweights in the back, so the rotating superstructure as well. Erect and maintain control lines, railings, or similar barriers to mark the boundaries of their hazard area. Recommend red danger tape for that. That's the best practice. Red danger tape means do not enter unless we have permission of the operator in this case. So keeping clear of the load when employees are engaged in hooking, unhooking, or guiding the load, or in the initial connection of that load to a component or structure, again, within the fall zone, the following shall be met. The materials being hoisted are rigged to prevent unintentional displacement. Hooks with self-closing latches, their equivalent, shall be used, so we have to have a safety latch there and the springs are working properly, all the proper pins and keepers in place. I recently dealt with another citation where the pin for the safety latch was missing, so they took a nail and bent it over there and received a citation for that. So make sure all the pins, the keepers, want to keep extra items available if something should get damaged. Now the exception is a J-hook is permitted to be used for setting wood trusses. The materials have to be rigged by a qualified rigger. Only employees needed to receive a load shall be permitted to be within the fall zone when the load is being landed. So all other employees must be clear, minimize exposure to riggers by hoisting routes, job planning. If we're setting trusses on a home, we don't want to swing the truss over the rigger, for example. If we have people on the top of the structure and they're on the far right, we might swing from the right to the left, have the materials on the ground, swing from the right to the left, so we avoid swinging over that person is how we would minimize exposure in that example. Also talks about a tag or restrain line used to prevent rotation of a load that would be hazardous. Most companies say use a tag line all the time. If it creates a hazard, if we're doing a tree removal job, for example, it's going to get hung up on branches, then we might not want the exposure of a tag line. But generally, to control the load from a safe distance, we use a length of rope. We call that a tag line. Prevent rotation of any load that has the potential there. The next slide, another sample of a violation. Talking about those hook latches we were just looking at, it said hooks with self-closing latches, their equivalent, were not used. Now this could be allowed, but in this particular situation, the employees were in the fall zone. So if you're going to remove a safety latch or use a J-hook, so we eliminate a fall exposure hazard, so someone doesn't have to go up and release that safety latch in the peak of the truss, for example, then that could be allowed, but have to minimize exposure. No one is allowed below the load. In this case, they had photographs of that, so citation issued here that we can see. The next example, citation, employees not needed to receive a load were permitted to be within the fall zone when a load was being landed. The crane operator permitted an employee to hand spacers to another employee while lowering trusses into place, $1,400 citation there. So on this project, there were two individuals on walls on a new structure on each side, and they were connecting the truss as it was being flown in on each side, and there was one employee on a ladder in the middle of the truss attaching spacers and support. So they were all in place while the truss was being landed. The safe approach would probably have been have the individuals on each wall connect the truss, and then the individual get on the ladder, connect the spacers, and additional support in the middle would be the idea there. Looking at some inspection criteria on the next slide, modified equipment. Shift inspections are done by a competent person rather. Monthly inspections also by a competent person. The shift inspection, the standard says, can be visual. Most companies go ahead and document a shift inspection. That way it will probably take care of the monthly requirement for documentation. Monthly inspection records have to be kept a minimum of 3 months, and annual inspections are done by a qualified person. Those records are kept for a 12-month period. When we look at some shift inspection criteria, again, it's a visual and functional test, but recommend documenting, and most customers want to see this, so good idea to have a daily inspection checklist for shift inspections. Everything's satisfactory, we're in good shape. You can see control mechanisms, what are the functions, air, hydraulic systems, are there any leaks that need to be addressed under the crane. Ground conditions, a lot of times people miss documenting that item, but what is our supporting foundation? We would recommend documenting that on the shift inspection. That is part of the requirement. Also check for current annual inspection with no deficiencies listed. The crane might have a current annual inspection decal, but the paperwork should be there as well with no deficiencies listed. Operator's manual must also be with the crane. The operator, the rigger, the signal person may need to refer to that, so the operator's manual is required to be with the crane. On this next violation, that is exactly what they were talking about, the operator's manual not readily available, and this was grouped with other violations as well. The next violation, the equipment was not inspected each month. It was in service, $1,000 violation there. Competent person did not evaluate ground conditions like we mentioned. Another serious violation, crane operator exposed employees who were not wearing head protection. So generally we think about the employer receiving the citation, but OSHA usually looks at who is the controlling party, who is affected, who's causing, okay, the violation. So in this particular one, we had a crane operator, he was operating a boom truck, and individuals from another company that were doing framing were not wearing head protection, so it said the crane operator exposed framing employees, and he received the citation, in fact. Also, the framing contractor received the very same citation for not having head protection for their employees. Also on this page it says a competent person did not begin a visual inspection. The operator admitted they had not performed a visual inspection there. The following violation, also serious. The employer admitted they had not conducted a monthly inspection, and the employer did not ensure that annual inspections had been conducted. So if OSHA comes on the project, they're going to look at your supporting foundation. How is your crane set up? Okay, is the crane operator trained properly? Is he certified? Are the rigger signal persons qualified? All the things we're talking about here today. They'll say, show me your monthly inspection. If you have a documented shift inspection, that's the best approach. Okay, show me your annual inspection, no deficiencies listed. Take a look at your operator's manual, the overall condition of the crane, the rigging, all of these key items we want to be aware of. The next slide, employers should ensure that cranes and other mobile equipment have safe, well-designed access systems and walking working surfaces. So that is important for the crane operators as well as riggers, signal persons, anyone else on the project that may have to get on or off the machine. I've seen plenty of accidents where people jump from the deck of the crane, or there isn't the skid-resistant material on the surface, walking surfaces of the crane, and cause some ankle, knee injuries that way. So want to use the handholds, the steps, take our time, face the equipment, and everything proper when we're getting on and off the equipment. Another sample of a citation here. This one has to do with barricades and work area control that we were talking about earlier. And this particular one is serious violation. The control lines, warning lines for the swing radius of the crane were not barricaded. $500 citation there. Also, personnel platform, the weight of the platform and its capacity were not conspicuously posted. $1,400 citation. So when we're doing our rigger signal person training, we definitely want to address personnel platforms in case those have to be used. And another violation on this slide, personal platform fall arrest system was was attached to a structural member within the platform. So it says we're not provided and did not use this fall protection system. So when we go over our personnel platform requirements, there's trial lift proof testing. Crane has to be derated by 50%, a number of things that we have to comply with to put people in a suspended personnel platform. We also talked about fall protection. We tie off to a structural member of the basket. Used to be we could tie off to that area or to a safety cable from the basket to above the wedge socket. The new standard talks about tying off to a structural member within the platform, so harness and lanyard, right fall protection in place. That wasn't the case here, so $1,400 citation we can see. On the following slide, also a serious violation. A pre-lift meeting was not attended by the equipment operator, signal person, and employees to be hoisted. They did conduct a meeting in this situation. They switched out 2 crew members, and they did not attend a pre-lift meeting, so we can see the $1,400 citation issued there. What are the training requirements? The employer related to crane rigging, signaling topics. The employer must provide training as follows. Power line safety topics, key item for us there. Operators in training, competent persons, supervisors, qualified persons, riggers, and signal persons. I did want to mention that riggers and signal persons can also be certified by the NCCCO, CIC, NCCER. We don't see that requirement a lot of the time, so the standard talks about qualification, and the standard says that the training is documented on a training certification record, which we'll see coming up. So a lot of times we see that and we think they have to be certified when in fact they have to be qualified according to the standards. Now, if a particular customer wants certification for riggers and signal persons and you want to do work at their facility, then that's the route you'll have to go. Also training on crush pinch points and tag out and startup procedures. So talking about our training certification records, here's an example. This one had to do with fall protection, so not only crane issues, but obviously a lot of topics in the OSHA standards. We have to have training certification records, and this one was a citation. The certification of fall protection must include the following: the identity of the employee trained, the dates, and the signature of the person who conducted the training there. So that can be documented on paperwork. We can have a training certification record similar to what we see here. What is the topic? Who is the qualified instructor? Name and signature. The date the training was completed, and then the name and signature of those candidates trained. We could also have that documented on wallet pocket cards. If we have NCCCO crane operator cards that we see here, or inspector cards. We also see a sample of a training certification record pocket card, again issued to the name, the issue date, the designations, rigger and signal person, hand and radio. We can see on this example the standard says you have to state hand, radio, or both, what type of signal person training was conducted, and then the qualified instructor, name and signature there. So again, crane operator, supervisors, management, everyone involved should be documenting that the crane operators, the riggers, signal persons, everyone has the proper documented training and the right experience for that task, and those things should be done in the planning stage. I also wanted to mention the importance of power line safety when working around power lines with our mobile cranes. Ensure the training is up to date, that the power line decals are current and reflect the current distance requirements of 20 feet. We can see there if it's 350,000 volts, up to 350 kV, or 50 feet if we're over 350 kV. And then we have 3 choices for working around power lines. If we have to work closer than 20 feet, we would utilize Table A. So again, ensure that anyone, riggers, signal persons, they're aware of power line hazards. If the crane contacts a power line, it's definitely going to be an issue for the ground personnel. So this concludes our presentation. Please feel free to contact me for additional information. Again, this is Joe DeFranco. My phone number 919-417-2139, and I'd like to thank you for your time today.